Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is Travis Shaddix. On this show, we try to find how we know what we know about turfgrass science. I hope everybody had a good holiday. I was doing some work with the computers and I had a little audio glitch there, but that's okay. We're back from the holiday season. We're back from Christmas break, back from the new year. And I hope everybody had a safe and good holiday season. And there's a few conferences left in January, a conference left in February before the conference season is over and the cool season grass starts growing again in March or April. But so we have some to get to. On that note, there's been some adjustments to the show. I made some upgrades to the to the studio here, so I have some new equipment. And the show you might be able to see the show in 4K if you have a 4K monitor or 4K TV and you want to watch it in 4K. I believe you can do that now. So that's nice. It took me forever to figure out how to do that, and I didn't have the audio set correctly. So who knows what's going to happen, but it'll eventually work itself out. All the kinks. I will be in Nebraska next week. Okay, at the Nebraska Turf Conference, and if you go to nebraskaturfgrass.com, the Turfgrass Conference website they have, you can click here on conference program, and you can get the schedule. And my talks are on January 13th, so that's Tuesday, January 13th at 1. I'm speaking to the lawn care group, and the title of that is 5 Turfgrass Marketing Fallacies. That one's pretty interesting. I had an opportunity to actually discuss that in a formal setting at a conference before. I only talk about it on my show. And just to give a little bit of, peek behind the curtains, it's not going to be 5. It's going to be like 7 or 8, but we'll go with however many fallacies I can go over in 45 minutes to an hour. But that'll be on Tuesday, January 13th. That's a lot of fun. I actually have a lot of examples of real life examples that have nothing to do with turfgrass. And then I have a whole plethora of examples of actual turfgrass marketing fallacies, from fertilizer companies to chemical companies to liquid fertility companies to you name it. And we're going to use those as examples to explain in detail, how information is delivered and why you should or should not have confidence when the information is true because it was a flawed marketing fallacy or whatever. So that's this 5 marketing fallacy one is what I'm looking forward to. I just finished putting that together a day or two ago. But there's other people there talking in golf and in landscape. They're on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, I'm speaking to the golf group at 1:00 about the agronomics and economics of soil test philosophies. And that is some of the work that you all funded here. The members and the subscribers here helped fund a lot of that work. And that work is still going on now, actually. Now, actually, it's growing. Since the last show in December, there's been another site expressed interest in participating in that project in Mississippi. So that project continues to grow. We don't have a lot of funding, but that speaks to the magnanimous nature of a lot of scientists. When they really want to answer a question, they don't have any funding, they'll figure out how to get it done. And this is apparently one of these questions that other people also have an interest in. So that project is continuing to grow. And then on the same day, on Wednesday, January 14th at 2:15, I'll be talking about a presentation entitled, "Is Potassium Really the Stress Element?" And spoiler alert, yes, it is the stress element. It oftentimes results in increased stress. So I guess technically you could call it a stress element, even though people think of it the other way around. So that's what I'll be doing in Nebraska. I'll get to your questions in a minute, guys. And then the following month, I will be in Virginia at the Conference on Higher Education Pedagogy. And this has really nothing to do with turfgrass per se. It's about teaching techniques and teaching styles. And I'm scheduled to be there on, February 5th, 2026 in Virginia. at Blacksburg, Virginia. And I'm scheduled to speak at 3:15. Okay, I'm saying that because I just checked the schedule, and I was on there, and everything was on there. And I checked the schedule, and I can't find it. So I don't know where it is. Maybe I'm missing it, but maybe they booted me off the schedule. Who knows what happened? Or maybe I'm just missing it. Let me see if I can find. Maybe they have an author search here or something, because I can't seem to find. I can't seem to find the date and the time that I was originally scheduled for. So I'll have to keep y'all up to date on that. But I'm scheduled, as far as I know, I'm scheduled to be there on February 5th and speaking at 3:15 in Blacksburg, Virginia. Okay, so if you're around that area, I wouldn't book your flights yet. If you're just coming to see me, I wouldn't book them yet. Because this was literally, it said, my name, it had the title and everything just 2 or 3 days ago. And now I go back there and for some reason it's not there. But I'm probably looking in the wrong spot, to be honest. But that's my upcoming schedule. Okay. Let's see. Were there any questions that I didn't address? Oh, Rob asked when I'll be in Virginia. So yeah, I'll be there the evening of February 4th. I'll be speaking on February 5th. And then I'll probably leave around lunchtime on February 6th, or a little bit before lunchtime. It's about a 6-hour drive from where I live to get to there. So I may end up stopping by and chatting with some of the turf people there. I don't know. And Mike Conroy asks, do these groups ask you for a topic or you talk on whatever you want? It depends, Mike. It just completely depends. Generally speaking, people will call me or book me because they know I'm a fertility specialist and they want someone to talk on that subject. That's 90% of the cases are usually that. The Nebraska conference was a little different. They asked me, what do I want to talk about? And I gave them a list of about 10 or 15 talks that I generally will give. And then they decided which ones were appropriate for their conference from the list that I gave them. So it just depends. And I think in Pennsylvania, I think Pennsylvania just let me pick. They just said, just give us the titles of whatever talk you want to talk on, and that'll be fine. But generally speaking, they're going to want me to talk about nutrition because that's what I'm a specialist in. I'm not going to go in and talk about pests or something because I don't know anything about pests. So that's kind of how it works. Yeah, good question. Okay, let's see. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about before I get into the article tonight is I have finished the first course for Turfgrass Epistemology, and this course is a 3-lecture course. It is on soils and soil formation. There's going to be a series of courses continuing to flow out of the channel or the website. And I wanted to introduce that tonight for the first time. And so if you go to turfgrassepistemology.com, you can peruse that website, and you can see the various things on the website, YouTube and podcasts and whatever consulting things that I do. You can join. There's an easy for some reason people have a lot of problems. YouTube makes it difficult for people to find the join button. So I put a join button on the website. Just click this button. It'll take you right to the join page on YouTube. So you can go through there and look at it, whatever. But you can also click on the course button here, or just go up to the top and click on online courses. And then you're going to come to a website, or my website, that has a variety of courses. And the course that is finished is the soil and soil origins course. These are collegiate level courses. This isn't YouTube, me going over an article. These are courses given from collegiate books, undergraduate books and graduate books. And what I expect to do is to take a book, a college book that we would use in class, and literally just break that book down. The first series I'm doing is just on basic soils, general soils. And so each chapter will be a lesson, and then the chapters are grouped by courses. So the first course is soil and soil origin, and the next course will be soil physical properties. And the titles of the lectures are here. So this one's completely done. The first the lecture is the soils around us, and the next lecture is soil formation and then soil classification. These are all general introductory lessons for soils, but these are the exact same lectures and the same topics that we would give, or I would give, in an undergraduate soils room for, say, sophomores or junior undergraduate students. And then I'm working on the soil physical properties, that course, and that's going to have 4 lectures in it. And then there's soil biological properties that has 3 lectures, and then soil chemical properties, which is really where I have spent most of my career, is in the soil chemical properties. That has, hang on a second, that has, oh God, seven lectures in it. Okay, so that's what to expect from Turfgrass Epistemology for this 2026. Is to I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing on YouTube, but I'm going to be releasing more in-depth content that would be more of, it's the same content you'd get at a college, but if you don't have the money or the interest in going and spending, thousands of dollars going and getting a degree, or say, $500 to $1,000 just taking a college course, if it's in-state or out-of-state or online, whatever the case is, you can get a lot of the same content, if not the exact same content, via this way. And these funds go to support the channel. And in turn, you get something in return, which would be more information, more education, but more of a, don't expect to tune in and have it be like goofy, like my show on YouTube. It's not really that way. It's not really me, critiquing people and the contents or whatever the case is. It's formal lectures that you'd go into to university systems in here. So, but what you would do is you would just click on the button here, and it would take you to this website, and you'd go in here and fill out your information. I have my background black, so it's kind of weird to see on my screen here, but you can see more information about the course, all the details about this particular course and whether or not it's of interest to you. And then once you put in the order, you have lifetime access to that course. Okay. Now, the question in the chat from Chuck is a very interesting question. Any lifetime members yet? Now, I don't know, Chuck, if you mean lifetime members of YouTube. I wish I could do that. YouTube handles that, and I don't have ability to do that. But there, I believe, for the courses, I don't know if you just happened to coincidentally ask that question, or if you're asking about courses, Chuck. For the courses, I believe there is a functionality that I can implement at some point to allow someone to be a member of the channel, I guess, or the website or whatever. And you would pay whatever fee that would come up. And then whatever courses are added into the system over time, you would just automatically have access to that for the same fee. You wouldn't pay anything extra for it. I believe that is a function that is, it's possible to achieve that. I'm not sure about that yet, but I'm getting there. Okay. Okay. So that's it. So look forward to that. The first course is out. You can go participate in that now. If you want to contribute by donating through GoFundMe or just through the YouTube, fine. That's I'm not going to say no. But I do feel a little awkward sometimes. And on top of that, YouTube takes like 30% or 40%. And so in this way, you can maybe make me feel a little bit better, I guess. Is you can, if you want to donate to the channel, you can do it through buying courses. And a much larger percentage of that revenue stays with the channel, and in turn, you're getting something back. So that's what's new for the Turfgrass Epistemology in 2026. And so my goal here on the channel or on the website is to have these 4 courses completed and open for access by Thanksgiving of 2026. So I'll probably be releasing these courses about every 2 months or so for 2026. And then the idea is that if there's other scholars that are interested in participating in this and getting the information out to the public and a collegiate level information, but out to the public in a general audience language type of way, then they can also use this venue to expose the audience to their areas of expertise as well, like nematodes or insects or weeds or whatever the case might be. Because a lot of the content, or actually all the content that I'm going to have on my channel for courses is going to be in my area of speciality, which is going to be soils and soil fertility, particularly in the world of soils. So that's what to look forward to. Okay, I think you're going to like it. I when I was doing the course, the first soil and soil origins course, I hadn't taught an undergraduate class, and it was just like I hadn't even looked at undergraduate information in 20 years, a long time. And it was nice to go back through that. And I'm like, yeah, there is a lot of information in here that I just take for granted that I think people know this. I'm assuming that people know what I talk about when I say an A horizon or a mollisol. I assume people know what I'm talking about, but that's probably not the case. And so it gives me an opportunity to kind of go through that from the beginning, so that if you do have questions, or I'm speaking, beyond your knowledge level, then a lot of that's, I hope, to be addressed in some of these courses, and you can just go through, and once you purchase it, you can go through it as many times as you want to. And each one of the courses, the presentation of the video is, there's a the PowerPoint presentation that I go through as I'm talking, and that's available to download with your purchase. Okay. Oh yeah, Chuck was asking about lifetime access. Yeah, and by the way, Chuck, there's some music at the end of the show tonight. I put it in there just for you. I'm going back to my old ways. I'm just going to start putting music back in. I don't want to do that because I end up having to edit things in and out. So tomorrow I got to sit here and edit it and edit out both the beginning and the end. So just more work for me, but I like it. So I'm going to do that a little bit more. So anyway, there's music at the end. But I'm pretty sure, Chuck, I don't want to commit to it yet, but I'm almost certain that you can pay like a monthly fee. I don't know if it's a lifetime access or not, but there's something like that. I don't know if it's lifetime for like you pay a fee and you always have all the courses, or if you pay a monthly fee as a member and you don't pay anything extra as courses get loaded in. But I do know once you buy the course, then you do have lifetime access on that email. Whatever email you use to purchase the course, you will have lifetime access to that course that you bought for forever. Okay. So yeah, that's the case. Okay. All right. Let's get into the PDF. The episode tonight is about potassium fertilization and does it affect dollar spot? Now, we've been going over diseases, and to be frank, I'm sort of, I don't know how this sounds, but I get kind of bored with topics that aren't soil fertility. I don't know why. It's just hard for me to sit and I love nematodes, I love weeds. I listen to it like an hour, I'm good. But to go over it for a very, very long time, it's just not my area of speciality. I feel uncomfortable talking about diseases because I'm not a scholar in diseases. I can't really pontificate or expand on the topic that much because I'm just not that good at it. I don't know much about it. In fact, I don't know anything about diseases. I said that at the beginning of this topic. So I get a little bit, distracted. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to take this opportunity where I know I'm kind of getting bored with it, to be frank. And I'm going to start pulling out some of the disease literature that's specific to nutrients to kind of refocus my interest. And then I'll kind of throw in some papers that have to do with, chemicals and things like that and cultural practices on diseases. Okay. Hope you guys understand and kind of bear with me as I weave my way through this. So this article is about potassium fertilization effects on dollar spot and annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass by the team at Rutgers with Dr. Clark and Dr. Murphy. And I don't know Daniel Ward, and I don't know Zhongxi Zhu. I don't know these people. I will say this is an international. Oh, no, this isn't an agronomy journal. Oh. Okay, well, this is a special edition to the ITSRJ, International Turfgrass Research Conference, but it was published in Agronomy Journal. That's disappointing because this paper is a good paper. I mean, I'm not here to critique Dr. Clark or Dr. Murphy. I mean, they run circles around me. But there are some things in this paper that I found curious. I just thought they just accidentally got slipped in because it was in the International Turf Research Journal, but these actually got in an Agronomy Journal, which is held to a different standard. Regardless, I'll talk about it when I get to it. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, introduction. Potassium is an essential element and is required in relatively large amounts for turfgrass growth. Unlike other plant essential elements, potassium is not a constituent of any plant compound, but is involved in many physiological processes, including photosynthesis, protein and carbohydrate formation, osmotic regulation, and enzymatic activity. Yeah, if you ever hear anybody say, oh, they got an organic potassium source and they're trying to sell you an organic potassium source, I got a bridge to sell you. Okay? That doesn't exist. There is no organic potassium source on the planet. Okay? It doesn't exist. Because potassium does not enter into any organic compound, period. Not in humans, not in plants. So it basically floats around in the cytoplasm, in the liquid of the plant, and in the solution in the soil. It never binds with carbon in a way that is like a covalent bond in any way. There's nothing like that exists with potassium. Okay, so don't ever get fooled by trying to buy organic potassium. That's a bunch of hogwash. There is polymer-coated potassium, and that slows the release, but not organic. That doesn't exist. Previous studies have demonstrated that potassium can improve. Now listen up. I'm going to talk about this next week. Is potassium a stress element? But and this is one reason why I thought this was an ITSRJ journal, because these citations are a little bit sketchy. But nevertheless, I'm going to say these things in the next sentence, and they're going to talk about a lot of the benefits of potassium. And I want to preface it by saying, as scholars, we need to be really careful about simply saying it benefits this. Potassium improves this, and then have a citation. Improves this, and has a citation. Improves that, and has a citation. Because if those citations are contextual, which almost all of them are, or it's specific, or it has something in that paper that is conditional. Okay, so what I mean by that is it says potassium can improve tolerance to drought, and then he cites Carol Petrovic's 91 paper and Ebden's 99 paper. And so I'm not saying it can't. I'm just saying when it does, it's a very specific situation. Usually it's on very, very low potassium soils, and it's oftentimes dependent upon the nitrogen availability or rate that you applied and the time of year you did it. So can it, that's the key word here, it can. In most cases, it won't. In most cases, potassium is going to do diddly squat unless it's severely deficient. It can improve tolerance to heat. Yes, it can, okay, but that's very disingenuous, I think. You got to be real careful the way you word that. I mean, I can go to the moon. I can, but am I ever going to go to the moon? Probably not, okay? So if someone doesn't know the literature on potassium, they can read this and go, well, here it is. Dr. Shaddix, it fixes heat, and it fixes wear tolerance, and it fixes moisture, drought stress, all these things. Well, it's possible, but is it probable? Probably not. It improves wear tolerance. Now, I'm going to talk about wear tolerance for a lot next week, and there is not a lot there. He has Sherman and Beard's 1975 paper, but that's a pretty weak paper. Okay, there's a lot of other papers that show it doesn't do diddly squat. From the gang in Georgia as well as in Florida, there's been ample evidence show that potassium doesn't do hardly anything for wear tolerance. Even in Kentucky, some work was done. Hardly nothing gets done with potassium with wear tolerance. Nothing. And low temperature stress, that can actually be the case in some situations, but not others. So I just say be careful with this. I read this and I'm like, oh, well, they put this in here because it's ITSRJ. I didn't know it was agronomy journal. That's disappointing. I just saw that. So nevertheless, although the influence of potassium fertilization on diseases, including anthracnose, brown patch, and microdochium patch, red thread, take-all patch, and typhula blight, has been studied on cool season turf grasses for over 50 years. The observed response has been disease dependent. So there's this idea that potassium is a stress element. You need to apply it to reduce your disease risk. And what they're saying is a lot of that work's been done, and it's contextual. It's dependent on what exactly you're talking about, particularly which disease you're talking about. A few studies have reported that potassium fertilization can decrease the severity of diseases like take-all patch. And notice it says reported as this patch by Goss and Gould in 1967, red thread in 1970, and anthracnose in 2018. Now, this anthracnose is legit on low-K soils. But on red thread, what I'm saying is these papers, the Goss paper and the Gould 1967, these are pretty weak citations to say. I mean, yeah, it was reported. Okay, I'm going to say it was reported. But there's a whole lot that's reported that doesn't do anything. And there's even more that show that it results in harm. And then then they contextualize it here a little bit. It says the majority of studies, however, have shown that potassium fertilization had no effect on turf diseases or increases their severity. which is what you'd expect from a team with, with these Rutgers guys. Team with Dr. Clark and Dr. Murphy on it. And, they know the literature. Yeah, most of the time, nothing's going to happen. Sometimes there might be a little bit of a benefit, but most of the time, nothing's going to happen, or it's going to increase severity. And that's been around for ages. And Soldat's doing the work. Dr. Woods did his work. There's been work done in Florida, and it just keeps showing the same thing over and over and over. Where there's a pretty good chance nothing's going to happen, and there's a better chance something harmful is going to happen than helpful. Let's be honest. I mean, whether it helps or harms, it's probably a wash. It's probably going to harm the plant more, but more than likely, nothing's going to happen at all. Zip. So you got probably 95% chance that nothing's going to happen or something harmful is going to happen. You got maybe a 4, 5, 6% chance something helpful is going to happen. Maybe if you're lucky, and that's pretty poor odds. I'm just pulling those percentages out of thin air. I'm based upon my knowledge of the literature, but I'm just pulling it out of thin air. I don't know what the percentages are. Dollar spot is a ubiquitous disease affecting most warm season and cool season turfgrass species worldwide. Few studies have been published on the effect of potassium fertilization on this disease, and of the studies conducted, the majority did not report potassium concentrations in the soil or leaf tissue, making interpreting the impact of potassium on dollar spot difficult. Most of these studies found that potassium had no effect on dollar spot on creeping bentgrass. Yeah, he did creeping bentgrass in this study and annual bluegrass, and you're going to see some differences between those. However, Markland in 1969 reported that increased foliar potassium decreased dollar spot severity on creeping bentgrass. And Meyer and Cuso in 1995 showed that increasing potassium fertilization rate increased dollar spot severity on one rating date. So you got one study saying there was an increase, another study saying there was a decrease. So, it's sort of conditional. Since dollar spot and anthracnose are both stress-related diseases, and potassium and nitrogen have been shown to reduce anthracnose severity on annual bluegrass putting green turf, our hypothesis was that potassium and nitrogen fertilization would decrease dollar spot severity on both annual bluegrass and Kentucky bluegrass putting green turf. Now, if you're a student and you happen to be watching this, there's a couple of professors around the United States. It's a little embarrassing to even say this, at least for me. They've actually instituted into some of their requirements of the class or suggestions in their class that they watch this show. Students, you need to go watch this episode of Turfgrass Epistemology. So if you're watching, students, or even faculty, this is exactly how to write a hypothesis. Most of these papers come out with these horrible hypotheses. There's no hypotheses. They put an objective and think that's the hypothesis. This is the way to write a hypothesis. Here we go. I'll read it again. Our hypothesis was that potassium and nitrogen fertilization would decrease dollar spot severity on annual bluegrass and Kentucky bluegrass. Why is this the way to write it? Because it's falsifiable. They're saying potassium and nitrogen will decrease dollar spot. Now you can form a null hypothesis. Potassium and nitrogen will not decrease dollar spot. And now you can go out and form the study and determine whether or not the results result in you rejecting the null hypothesis or failing to reject the null hypothesis. When you just say our objective was to go measure potassium in the soil, that's not a hypothesis. So this is the way to write it. Very, very well written hypothesis right here. Materials and methods. There were two 2-year trials that were conducted in 2020 and 21 on annual bluegrass and Kentucky bluegrass. Annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass. The two trials were maintained as putting green turf on a mat layer overlying a sandy loam. The 70 millimeter deep mat layer on an annual bluegrass field and a 60 millimeter mat layer on the Kentucky bluegrass on creeping bentgrass field were developed by frequent top dressing with a medium sand. The annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass trials were inoculated with 2 isolate mixtures of the disease. Okay, that's how they made the plots infected. That's how they infected the plots. Annual bluegrass trial was conducted on a 19-year-old annual bluegrass turf. The mat layer was of PK, calcium, magnesium, and pH values were 45, and the potassium in this mat layer was 16. Okay, that's pretty low. Now, we're talking about the top 70 millimeters or 60 millimeters. We're talking about, just the top, little bit there, top inch or so. But the, that's still pretty low. And they have correlation at Rutgers with that, they're saying that, the mat layer should probably be around 40 or 50 parts per million omega-3 potassium in order to reduce winter kill. In this case, they're looking at disease, and they're also looking at the mat layer because that's where a lot of the roots are. So they're trying to correlate it with the mat layer. The creeping bentgrass trial was established on 20-year-old creeping bentgrass, and the mat layer potassium here was 31, so about twice as much. And the pHs, these were 5.5 and 5.9. The two trials consisted of 8 treatments arranged as a 4x4 factorial or 4x2 factorial in a randomized clinical block design. Now, 4 rates of potassium were applied as potassium sulfate solution. Now, this is when, and this is again why I thought, this is definitely an ITSRJ journal or paper, because they used potassium sulfate. That's why they put it in ITSRJ. But they didn't. They put it in an agronomy journal, and that's one limitation to this study is that the potassium source they used was potassium sulfate. And it's going to be very, you have to contextualize the conclusions and the results within the knowledge that they use potassium sulfate, a fertilizer that can induce a turf response from both the potassium and the sulfate, as opposed to potassium chloride, where the turfgrass response would almost assuredly come only from potassium, because a turfgrass response to chloride has never been documented. So it's a limitation of the study, unfortunately. I still think it's probably sound, but using potassium chloride would have removed that confounding factor of sulfate. They used the rates of 3.4, 6.9, and 13.8 kilograms per hectare every 14 days. So this ends up being, oh God, what is that? Like a third of a pound of potassium every 2 weeks. And then I guess that'd be 1/6 of a pound and I don't know what that is, 1/12 of a pound or something like that. It's not very much every 2 weeks. From May to September in 2020 and 21 for a total of, so the total here was about 3/4 of a pound of K, about 1.5 pounds of K, and about 3 pounds of K, something like that. I can't do that math in my head. Whatever 138 divided by 49 is. So that's how much K they put out over the year, which is, reasonable. And then the 2 nitrogen fertility rates were sprayed as urea solutions at a rate of 1/10 of a pound of N every 728 days from May to September. And the total amount of N they applied was 2 pounds or 98 kilograms per hectare and 1/2 pound or 24.5 kilograms per hectare. Okay. Data collection, they measured dollar spot infection centers every 2 to 6 days. The disease severity was summarized using this area under the disease progress curve that makes the scientists look really, really intelligent. But all we do is just pull this equation from the software that actually runs it for us. And then leaf tissue clippings were collected for each plot using a walk behind greens mower equipment with a collection bucket to determine tissue nutrient content. So they did nutrient content. And then 6 0 to 17 centimeter deep soil cores were randomly collected for each plot. And what they did was they just took off the mat layer and measured that. And then they measured the bottom 6 inch or 4 inches. Sorry. So they measured basically in soil layers. So they just took off the mat layer, measured that. And then the remaining depth happened to be 4 inches of soil. That's the reason they did 0 to 17 centimeters. At least that's what it looks like from what they wrote. All right. Field maintenance. The additional nitrogen, urea, ammonium sulfate, and ammonium polyphosphate. I don't know why they say ammonium polyphosphate. Usually it's monoammonium phosphate or diammonium phosphate, but whatever. Was applied in March, April, October, and November for a total of a little less than 2 pounds of nitrogen in 2020, and then 1.5 pounds. This was outside of the. In other words, when they were running the study, they had those rates, and then when they weren't running the study, they adjusted the nitrogen rates to recover from damage. Basically, is what they did. Okay. Fungicides known to have no effect on dollar spot were applied. And again, this was outside of they were basically trying to control everything. While the study was going on, they were controlling everything. And they didn't want any of the other diseases, like anthracnose or something, to come in. So they did what they could to make sure everything else was in control, and then they just let the dollar spot take over. All right, so the results. Let me check the chat just in case. Excuse me, let me drink of water. No questions? Okay, I'll keep going. So the results, the annual bluegrass trial. I'm going to show almost all these results in these figures. It's just easier to show. Okay, let me just show these figures. Let me read it first, and I'll read it. The leaf tissue potassium response to leaf tissue K response to potassium fertilization rate was evident in a two-way interaction. The dependency on the nitrogen fertilization rate indicated that leaf tissue potassium increased quadratically with increasing potassium rate under both nitrogen rates. However, there was a greater increase in range in leaf tissue K under the high rate of nitrogen. So let me just show these things down here. It's easier to just show these tables and figures. Basically, what happened was the leaf tissue potassium responds to interaction of potassium fertilization, nitrogen fertilization rate. So here you see going from 0 K up to 138 kilograms of K. Okay, 0, 34, 69, 138. So you're going up and up as you apply more K. And what we're looking at is, because there was an interaction, they split out the N rates. And so we're looking at what happened with underneath the 24 kilogram N rate, or the half pound N rate, and the 2 pound N rate, the 98 kilogram N rate. So we're looking at the increase in leaf tissue K. And, although there was an interaction, the take-home message is, as you applied more potassium, the leaf tissue potassium went up. It's basically that simple, regardless of whether it was under the half pound N or the 2 pounds N. It still went up. It went up a little bit differently, a little bit of different rate, but they still went up. Okay, and in the 0K, I will say this, the 0K was legitimately low. I mean, generally speaking, 1.5% to 2% potassium in the leaf tissue of a cool season grass is usually sufficient. What this means here, this 9,000, that's 0.9%. So 10,000 is 1% of a million, right? So this is 9,000 milligrams per kilogram, which is 0.9% in the leaf tissue. That's pretty low. And then they applied the lowest rate, 34, and it went up to 2%, or 20,000 parts per million. I don't know why they did it in such high. They should have done it in grams. If you mark that out, you can mark these zeros out. Just call it grams per kilogram. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the point being is that I agree the 0K was at high risk of potassium deficiency when you're that low in the tissue. I mean, you're less than 1% in the tissue. That's pretty low. And then just apply a little bit and you're up to 2% and you're done. That's the take-home message, whether you apply to half pound in or 2 pounds in. Now, when you go to the differences in years, the same exact potassium, 0, 34, 69, 138, and you see the differences in years. Now, there was a difference in years, but still the point is that potassium went up in the tissue each year. The first year it only went up to 1.8%, and the second year it went up to 2.1%, but it still went up, and it probably went up to a sufficient level in both cases, whether it was at 1.8 or 2.1. That's sufficient in my opinion. Okay, so the point is, potassium that they applied is doing what they expect it to do, move the tissue potassium concentration up. Now, the mat layer potassium response, we're looking at potassium fertilization again, 0, 34, 69, 138. And you're looking at the extractable, so malic 3 from the mat layer. And you'll see at the beginning, the malic 3 was 16, as I mentioned, and the other one, I thought it was 31. This one says 19. I don't know what that's about. But anyway, the point is that as they applied more and more potassium, the extractable, malic 3 extractable in the mat layer went from 16 parts per million to 22 parts per million at the same, when the amount of potassium was applied to increase the potassium in the tissue to what I would deem to be a sufficient level, 2%. What ended up being in the soil was about 22 parts per million potassium in 2020, and it was 30 parts per million in 2021. Okay. Now you keep applying more and more K, the potassium in the tissue, or the mat layer goes up and up, all the way up to 74 parts per million in 2020 and 54 parts per million in 2021. So you can keep applying more and more K if you want to, and the potassium in the soil is going to keep going up, and you're going to see what happens to disease. Okay, a little bit goes a long way. Okay. You apply more and more thinking you're going to have like some sort of blanket of protection or insurance. I'm going to build the soil up. I mean, you probably will build the soil up. Probably also build your bill up for disease control later. So that's what's going on with potassium relative to the years and relative to nitrogen in the leaf tissue and in the soil. Now let's look at what happens in the mat layer potassium and leaf tissue response. That was on annual bluegrass, I believe. Yeah, that was on annual bluegrass. Now let's look what happens on in creeping bentgrass. So this is the same thing, but on creeping bentgrass. And because there was no interaction, that first thing, they pulled these over years. And you'll still see potassium rate goes up. The mat layer potassium goes up from 28 for the creeping bentgrass with no K to 78 at 138 kilograms per hectare of K. There were 78 parts per million in the mat layer. The leaf tissue went from 1.3% with no potassium applied to 1.6 with 34 kilograms, or like say 3/4 of a pound, and then went up to 2.1 with like almost 3 pounds of K. And then 2020 and 2021 was essentially the same thing. So it went from 1.3 to 2.6 and went up to a higher level, but it still went up to 2.6 at the highest amount of K. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. You're applying potassium. It's going up in the soil. It's going up in the tissue. Okay. As I've said before, I'll say it again. I give two flips about what's in the soil and what's in the tissue, unless you can convince me that that number is somehow correlated to a turfgrass response that I care about. In this particular example, they're going to get to the turfgrass response that I care about. And you're going to see, you don't want to be applying all this potassium. You're going to see real quick. Okay. Now let's get to that. The dollar spot severity measured as area under the disease progress curve. Now I will say this. If Dr. Murphy or Dr. Clark are watching this, I will humbly beg your forgiveness if I'm getting this wrong. I'm misunderstanding it. But this is not my understanding of how you do regressions. These are averages or means, and we don't use means on regression graphs. That makes the relationship look much stronger than it actually is. It changes the p-value and the r-squared. The line's going to be the same, but this is the average of several points. And it makes these lines look nice and tight and clean. And in reality, that most statisticians won't sign off on that. It doesn't mean there's not a relationship. It doesn't mean the results aren't the exact same. It's just that when I saw this, I'm like, well, that's ITSRJ. I'll let it slide. Big deal. What are you going to do? But this type of information in Agronomy Journal is very disappointing to see this. Normally what you'll see, like this particular red dot here, what you'll find is that it's an average of means. So these means might be like this. You're going to see a bunch of dots in a line like this. And you're going to see a line go right through it and going, that looks horrible. No, that does look horrible, but that's the way it's supposed to look. Regression graphs don't look this straight. They don't look this clean. When you do means, they do look this clean. But statistically, I think that's a flaw. It's another limitation of this study. And again, forgive me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. Anyway, so what you'll see here on this graph is potassium rates going from 20 kilograms per hectare per year all the way up to 140. Well, this is the scale, the same rates that they applied before. And you'll see when they applied 20 or half a pound of N, and they also applied more and more potassium, you saw more and more disease. This is on annual bluegrass. When they applied more nitrogen, you saw more and more disease, but it was at a greater level. That's what that's saying. Not only did you see more disease as you applied more K, you also saw more disease as you applied more N with more K. All right. When you go to this graph over here, this line graph here, this is looking at different years, and all this is showing is that, again, you saw the potassium go, as the potassium goes up, the disease goes up. The area under the curve goes from 3,000 to 12,000 area under the disease progress curve. So in other words, you're seeing a very consistent relationship with the increase in dollar spot severity, area under the disease progress curve, as you apply more and more potassium. And this is an open invitation to any pathologist on the planet and any soil fertility specialist on the planet that can come on here and explain to me exactly what's going on, because I don't know what's going on. There's a pulmonologist. I have my backdoor neighbor's a pulmonologist. And I had a conversation with him about this. And he was saying when human cells actually get lysed, there'll be a sudden release of potassium, a sudden increase in potassium. So it seems to me like there's something going on with potassium and hormones like putrescine or cadaverine that actually might decay the tissue and result in a sudden release of potassium. I don't know what's going on, or if the potassium itself is actually resulting in that. I don't know, and I don't think anybody else knows. That's the whole thing. Okay, we can show this. We can show this all day long. People are still going to apply potassium. They're still not going to listen. They're still going to think that the potassium helps because they've been doing it for 20 years. They're still going to do it. We can show them this, but we can't explain why it's this way. And I don't know why it's this way. So please come on my show, anybody that's willing to explain this to me. Because I don't know why more potassium results in more disease, and apparently neither does anybody else in the turfgrass world. Here we see dollar spot severity. That was on those previous things were on annual bluegrass, and now I believe this one is. These are pulled over years. So this is creeping bentgrass. So this is the same thing on both years, and you'll see there in disease progress go from 4,000 to 12,000 again. And see, this doesn't exist. This line here is that doesn't exist. What's in reality, these numbers look like this. This data should look something like this. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. It would look a little less clean. It'd look a little less pretty, but that's the way generally graphs will look. And that's the way statisticians generally sign off on them. And the p-value is going to change and the r-square is going to change, but the results should be the same. Not should be the same. They're probably going to be the same. Okay. So for authors who are doing regressions, in the world of turfgrass at least, the p-value does need to be significant, obviously. The r-squared is important, obviously. But we can't just start averaging these results just to artificially change those values to show that there's significance. You still need to graph it correctly. A little disappointed in that, but that's fine. Here we go. The dollar spot severity measured as the disease progress curve for creeping bentgrass. Now this is relative to just nitrogen. So when they applied more nitrogen in the first year, they saw less disease. When they applied more nitrogen in the second year, it was the same. Okay. That was on creeping bentgrass. So creeping bentgrass, one year it was a little bit better. The next year, nothing changed, nothing happened. And you'll basically see that same thing. This same dynamic on this table is seen right here in this graph where you see tissue nitrogen. The second year, nothing really happened. It's a flat line. And the first year you saw an increase. So a little bit more nitrogen in the leaf tissue. The first year they saw a little bit more disease. Not strong, but there's something there. Okay. Annual bluegrass, this is dollar spot severity measured on the disease progress curve for annual bluegrass. And you'll see here year 2021 and year 2020. And you'll see a very consistent increase as the leaf tissue potassium goes up. We saw it in the soil potassium. Now we're seeing it in the leaf potassium. We're seeing a very predictable increase in disease when the potassium goes up. It's basically that simple. You see that time after time after time. Dollar spot severity. Now we're looking at the mat layer K on annual bluegrass. And this one over here is the mat layer K, the leaf tissue K on creeping bentgrass. So let's start with annual bluegrass first and the mat layer. So this would be Mehlich 3 extractable. And you see the first year, there wasn't a whole lot there. There's a lot of scatter. The second year, the dollar spot just explodes well above the previous year. Once you get to about 40 or 50 parts per million potassium in the tissue. In the mat layer. So in other words, I've generally said 40 or 50 parts per million in the mat layer is generally where you want to be for a variety of reasons. And this certainly supports that. The lower you are, the better to some degree. But I wouldn't get too much below 40 before you start running into risk, with annual bluegrass particularly, before you start running into risk of winter kill. And then you see dollar spot severity of creeping bentgrass and leaf tissue K. And then here you see leaf tissue K going up. I want more potassium in the leaf. Do a tissue analysis. You got to get that tissue K up. Well, for creeping bentgrass, at this particular location, the higher you went, the more likely you're going to have disease. It went from when you started off about 1.2%, you had 10,000 area under the disease progress curve, and you doubled that from 1.2% to about 2.4%. You're essentially doubling the disease to 20,000 under the disease progress curve. Okay. And then you see dollar spot severity on the leaf tissue nitrogen for annual bluegrass. And again, you see the little bit of an increase there. The only time that it actually went down was when creeping bentgrass. when you saw a little bit of decline from with the disease on creeping bentgrass, you saw a little bit of decline from the application of nitrogen. So there's a little bit scattered here and there with nitrogen. There was one time when it went up and one time when it went down. Creeping bentgrass turf, it actually had a benefit one year, and the next year it didn't really have much of a benefit for the nitrogen. But in almost every case, the addition of potassium increased potassium in the soil, in the mat layer, in the leaf tissue, and it resulted in increased dollar spot. Increased potassium fertilization consistently increased dollar spot severity on annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass. On annual bluegrass, increased dollar spot with increasing potassium fertilization rate appeared to plateau above 34 kilograms per hectare, so basically 3/4 of a pound in 2020, and intensified more gradually above about 1.5 pounds in 2021. So I wouldn't be putting out much more than that, per year. You're trying to reduce dollar spot if that's your major issue. Let's see. Multiple linear regression indicated that models containing leaf tissue potassium usually had I'm not going to read that. This just shows that the leaf tissue could have been used as well. It was a good correlation. The potassium fertilization had a more pronounced effect than nitrogen in increasing dollar spot severity on annual bluegrass grown on a low potassium mat layer. Low potassium in the mat layer and leaf tissue were associated with lower dollar spot severity on both annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass turf. However, these potassium levels were indicative of very low potassium availability. So that's what they're saying is that the initial interpretation of that potassium was that it was low. In other words, the soil test lab looked at their potassium and said, oh, you're low, or actually very low. It says very low availability. And you probably need to apply potassium. But meanwhile, they went out and applied potassium, and it resulted in more disease. So this is what I've said. I don't really. In the old days, I got this actually from a very well-known scientist. He said, don't worry about the numbers so much, Travis. Just use the interpretation because each lab's going to be slightly different. And I did that for a long time until it's just like a splinter in my mind. It kept creeping back up. I'm like, well, how do they know? How do they know? How do they know? And in reality, this particular scientist had it completely backwards. You shouldn't use the recommendation because the recommendation, who knows where they got that from? When we look at the literature tends to be pretty specific or pretty useful across a wide variety of locations. And what they're saying here is that these potassium levels were indicative of very low potassium, meaning we should apply potassium, but applying potassium actually resulted in more disease. So in other words, the interpretation is wrong. And you've heard me say this before. If your turf looks good, but the soil test says you need to apply potassium, the soil test is wrong. It's just that simple. I don't know how to make it more simple than that. Same thing with phosphorus and magnesium. Iron for sure. Now my iron levels are low. I need to apply iron. That soil test is dead wrong. Okay? It is dead wrong. There is no soil test for iron that has any sort of correlation or predictive value. Forget about it. So there is a little bit with phosphorus, there is a little bit with potassium. But these soil tests get their recommendations from I don't know where. And in this particular case, these gentlemen are saying, the soil test said it was very, very low and we should apply it, but yet when we applied it, it caused more problems. That's what this paragraph is saying, guys. That's what it's saying. Okay? They're saying it in scientific language, but that's what it is. We applied it, it caused more disease. The soil test told us to apply it. So the soil test is wrong. It's not sacrilege to say that. There is no position in science that should be held so firmly that you wouldn't happily divorce yourself from it if given sufficient evidence. That should be the case with all scientists. I could be convinced the earth is flat if you gave me enough evidence. I would easily forget the earth is an oblate spheroid if you gave me sufficient evidence. Now, in that particular case, you would have to give me such extraordinary evidence that it would just take an inordinate amount of evidence. But I'm not saying I wouldn't change my mind. And that's the case with soil tests. So if you've been using these soil tests, you're like, well, I'm following a recommendation and I'm applying this and applying that. I'm letting you know. You might want to reconsider your position. Because the scholars in this area, I'll leave the names out of it, but the scholars in this area that have been on my channel and, the authors who publish in this field, for the most part, we're aligned very well. I mean, we have a consensus in many cases, and that is most of these soil test recommendations are in fantasy land. The interpretation can be fairly accurate. I mean, it can be close. In other words, is it low or not low? But these recommendations, applying all this potassium, applying all this phosphorus, who knows where they're getting this stuff from? Okay. I think that's it. Oh, here we go. Relative to potassium, dollar spot responses to nitrogen were small. Nitrogen did not affect dollar spot severity in 2021 and increased and slightly decreased disease severity in 2020 on annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass, respectively. So it was specific to the turfgrass. The effect of nitrogen on dollar spot was specific to the turfgrass. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's going to be all. So the short and skinny of it is, in virtually every case, the addition of potassium was not warranted. It was not needed, but it was recommended. And the application of that potassium actually resulted in more harm as a result of increased dollar spot on creeping bentgrass and on annual bluegrass, both years under two different nitrogen rates. That's the take-home message. And I mean, again, my mind can be changed, but there is such an inordinate amount of evidence indicating that potassium can be beneficial, but only when it's low. And when it's low, a tiny bit is all that it takes. Adding more is probably going to cause more problems. As you saw right here. I mean, I'll show you that that's what these graphs are showing. Where was that graph? So these graphs right here is that's what that's showing. So in the first year, you see that there's really nothing happened here. In the second year, you saw this big increase. But even in the second year, if they apply just a little bit down here, the smallest amount of potassium, they probably would have been the same as the prior year. But they keep applying more and more and more and more and more. You're going to get more and more disease. Okay? So it's very, very, very rare to see a potassium response, but it's even more rare to, if you're going to see a turfgrass response to potassium, that you see it by these very, very high rates. It's almost always a half pound of K for the year. For the year, is almost always enough, even if you have a potassium deficiency. Usually you don't, but if you do, for the year a half, not a pound every application. That's what this is. That's what you're going to end up with, these massively high disease outbreaks and all sorts of issues. Okay, so please keep that in mind as we continue to build our knowledge base. Wilson Online says 1 kilogram per hectare equals 0.02 pounds per thousand. So around 0.7 pounds per thousand per year. Is that right? Yeah, about that. Yeah. So the math is 49 kilograms per hectare is 1 pound in, or 1 pound. So 98 is 2 pounds. And so you can do the math, back it up however you want to, do the conversion however you want to do it. But that sounds right, yeah. So it doesn't need much. Whether it's, I don't know if that 0.7 pounds was the lowest rate of K or the lowest rate of N, I don't remember. But it's very little. Okay, most people are putting out 0.7 pounds or 1 pound per application and doing 2 or 3 or 4 applications a year. That's where you're running into trouble, guys. Okay, next week, I will be in Nebraska. Come by and see me if you want to get some turfgrass knowledge. I'll be walking around the trade show floor, or I guess it's Wednesday night. I think it's Wednesday evening. I think it is. And so you can catch me there, or you come by and see the talks that I give. So I will not be on next week. The next show will be a members only show on Monday, the 19th of, oh man, it's Martin Luther King Day on the 19th. Dang it. So my kids are out of school. So so the next will be 2 weeks from now, because I'll be driving. So it'll be Tuesday evening, January 20th. That'll be the next show. Okay, guys and gals, I'm sorry for such a delay, but right after this, I have one other little break there going to Virginia, but then it should be smooth sailing for the foreseeable future. I don't have another talk scheduled until September. Okay, guys, here's some music for you. One of my favorite bands, and I've been trying to see them for about 3 or 4 years, about 3 years, I guess. And every time they come around Kentucky, they end up coming to some festival that costs like $500, and I can't take my daughter to it because they have like Slayer at it or something. I can't take my 9-year-old daughter to a Slayer concert. So they're coming to Ohio this coming spring, but they're coming with Youngblood, and the tickets are $800 a piece. So I can't even take them now. I'm like, my goodness. So I will eventually find a way to cross paths with this band whenever they get to Kentucky or somewhere nearby for a reasonable fee. But this is one of my favorite songs. This is off of their first album. They wrote this when they were teenagers. It's surprisingly good considering how old they were when they wrote it. Appreciate it. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks.